Okay, well, we're going to continue our discussion about the Maccabees. And because, of course, they will take us into the next part of the history of the Jews. So at the end of our last discussion, we talked about how there are three sons now of Mattathias who are left, these three brothers, Simon, Jonathan, and Johanan. They go across, they're this band of outlaws really to the Syrians, but to the Jews, they sort of represent these patriots, they're kind of held as heroes. Jonathan becomes the leader of this group. So if you look at the family tree of Mattathias that we've looked at before, of course, Judas dies, and Jonathan will become now that leader, that military leader of this band of nomadic men and women that are out in this area east of the Jordan. Well, Jonathan actually has some great successes with the Syrians. We're 100 years now, a little bit over 100 years now from Jesus's death, and the Syrians attempt to destroy this band of patriots over and over again, but they're unsuccessful over and over again. Jonathan's success comes really with diplomacy. There's a pretender that tries to take the Syrian throne. The Syrians turn to Jonathan, actually, because of his strength and his ability to resist against the Syrians. And they turn to him and this Jewish army in order to bypass these Hellenist Jews who are loyal to this pretender. And before the war is over, Jonathan was the high priest. He was the governor of Judea. He was a member of the Syrian nobility. And he was a friend to the Romans. So he really does really well politically in the world scene. So this is the youngest son of Mattathias Maccabees. Simon, his brother, he makes governor over the Palestinian coastal areas. So Joppa and those cities along the coast there. Jonathan is finally killed by a Syrian general. Simon, the only living son of Mattathias, becomes the ruler and the high priest of this, what is now considered the Jewish state. Simon was advanced in years when he assumes the office of high priest. He starves out the Syrian garrison at Acre, and he occupies Joppa and those coastal cities. And there's a period of peace when Simon is the high priest. And the Hasidims, those very staunch Orthodox Jews, they are the ones that recognize only the family of Onias as the high priesthood and the priesthood that descends from Aaron. But that family, unfortunately, as you recall from our previous lessons, has fled and gone to Egypt. And so they resolve themselves to the fact that Simon should be the leader and the high priest forever until there should arise a faithful prophet. And that's also seen in the book of the Maccabees. And so this new dynasty, which would be known as the Hasmoneans, begins its period of well-known reign. And so the Hasmonean Jews, who you'll read about in history, are the descendants of Simon Maccabee, the brother of Judas who institutes Hanukkah, the son of Mattathias, who is unwilling to offer on the altar of Modin. Well, the Hasmonean Jews, they have some successes. In 1934, Simon and his two sons were murdered, but there's a third son. And the third son's name is John Hyrcanus, and he manages to escape. This is a depiction of him on a coin, and so it's maybe fairly similar to the way he looked. He succeeds his father as the head of what now is considered the Jewish state. So this Hasmonean dynasty, it actually takes quite a bit of territory. With this last son of Mattathias dead, this heroic age of what's called the Maccabean period and struggle comes to an end. and Syria will recognize John Hyrcanus as the ruler. He's the son of Simon, and on condition that he will submit himself to Syria, they will accept him as the ruler. And if he promises to help in the Syrian military campaigns in the future. And so John Hyrcanus becomes really their leader. He's asked to give up the coastal cities, which had been annexed by his father and his uncle, Simon and Jonathan. John Hyrcanus makes some interesting moves and some interesting things that pertain to the Gospels. He promotes Jewish commerce, and he captures the cities and the roadways in Judea that run from Egypt to Syria. He also conquers the territory of Edom, and he compels the Edomites, who are the descendants of Esau, to be circumcised and to accept Judaism. Now, these conservative Jews, these Hasidim Jews, these conservative Jews who are about to really in these years become what is known as the party of the Pharisees, they oppose to the annexing of this territory of Edom. They don't want the descendants of Esau to follow their royal law. But John Hyrcanus, who's the son of Simon Maccabee, he will enforce this to the Edomites. The wealthy businessman, the aristocrats, the educated, the Hellenist Jews, who will become the party of the Sadducees, they promote this growth because they want the more this Jewish state grows, the more power and prestige they have. They favor commerce opportunities and they favor the larger territory. And John Hyrcanus will move north. He goes into Samaria. He destroys the temple at Mount Gerizim that Sanballat had erected, and his son-in-law had acted as a priest, unrightfully so. It is the temple that is mentioned by the woman at the well in John, the 4th chapter, when she says, "Our fathers worshiped," and she uses the past tense in this mountain. "But you Jews say that in Jerusalem, that's the place where you worship." When she refers to this in past tense, these are the years that temple has been destroyed in Mount Gerizim. It never did ever really become rebuilt. And he regains those coastal territories that had been given up, though not willingly so. And so John Hyrcanus becomes a very important part of history, being a descendant of the Maccabees, but rightfully in his own way has increased the territories of the Jews, having the support of the Sadducees and the reservations of the Pharisees, which now are becoming these political type parties. John Hyrcanus expands his state. He includes territories in the coast, like we said. He takes the territories of Edomedia, which is Edom, of Syria, and Moab. Edom, Samaria, and Moab were historically interwoven with Israel, though not favorably, through Esau, Lot, and the mixed marriages of Samaria. And so these were not popular moves from this most conservative wing of the state of the Jewish state. His policy of conquest, like I said, was supported by the wealthy men, the aristocrats, those who hope to grow in power and prestige, have that commercial dominance, and particularly those who would make up the Sadducees party. The Syrian king leaves Palestine. The Hellenizing party disappears from the Jewish political scene. The Hasidim Jews are victorious due to the Maccabean revolts, and although the Hasidims don't fully align themselves with the Maccabees, they're willing to fall under the Syrian political rule in order that they have religious freedom, so they kind of fall in line with the more Hellenist, or those that are striving to be in the political framework of the Syrians. The Hellenist Jews now become this loyal member of the Jewish community, because if you can't beat them, join them, kind of a thing. So now we have what we will know of in the New Testament and is spoken of widely in the New Testament in the harmony of the Gospels, and that is we will have these two parties, these two sects of the Jews, which arise during these years of John Hyrcanus. The ideals of the Hellenist party were perpetuated in what would be known as the party of the Sadducees. They were the ones who wanted commerce. As you remember in the New Testament, the way that you can look at it is the Pharisees' domain was the synagogues where the law was taught. They were the lawyers. They were the priests. They were the scribes. The Sadducees' domain was the temple, the capital, where the taxes were collected. Temple taxes were paid each year. They really grew rich. They were the aristocrats of the Jewish community. Now, when this great Sanhedrin, which was really the supreme court of the land, which we read about so extensively in the New Testament, was set up, the political parties, or the two parties that were the major parties among the Jewish people, were the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and they make up that high court. The high priest, or the supreme judge, was a Sadducee. There were 71 members of the Jewish court, of the Sanhedrin. They were made up of these two parties. The two parties came from these Hellenizing Jews and these Hasidim Jews. And they really were a different thought process. They had a different thought process pertaining to the law and pertaining to their allegiance to the government. These parties were both mentioned in the years of John Hyrcanus through history. And so it is in these years, 100, just slightly plus years of the time of Jesus's birth, when the Sadducees and Pharisees begin to really be seen in the writings of those days. Before his death, John Hyrcanus actually will declare himself to be a Sadducee. So it's sort of an interesting thing to think about. He really has shifted. Remember who Maccabees was. And then Maccabees' 5 sons were, Simon being the son of John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus just drifts. It's this generational driftings that you see during this time. And so we end our class today having a better understanding of who the Sadducees and Pharisees are and how they came about. You know, those Hasidim Jews at the beginning, when we saw them, 100 years prior to this in our class that we, in the years that we've already covered, they really were the ones who really tried to keep that law and restore back. But they knew of the pressures of the politics of the day, that what they really strove for was that political freedom. Though in the New Testament, not the political freedom, I'm sorry, the religious freedom. And so they wade into politics so that they might have religious freedom. But you see that because the Zealots were the ones who wanted the freedom from the Roman government. And so these are parties that played the political game in order to survive. In an all-out effort to protect the national identity by following the law closely, there arose this hyper-conservative group called the Pharisees. While they would not resist the political government as long as it allowed them the religious freedom, it would be the religious freedom which would allow them then to have this hyper-conservative approach to the scriptures. They would make laws upon laws based off traditions that would fence in the laws so far out removed that people would never be able to stray from the law. And that's who they were. The Pharisees began to incorporate added laws as the Hellenism grew, even within Jerusalem. So as the liberal mindset began to take more and more of a role in the history of the Jewish people, that conservative mindset began to be more and more stringent. and set up more and more laws and began to make things laws that were not laws in order to protect the people, lest they ever stray into that other area. You can see these things happening. You can see pendulum swings. They swing one way and then they swing dramatically back the other way. And during this time, the Pharisees' rival sect was the Sadducees, and the Sadducees' ideals were perpetuated by the ideals of Hellenism. They wanted the education, they wanted the finer things that the Greek culture allowed them to have. They wanted the commerce, they wanted the trade, they wanted the conveniences of modern life. They wanted to have the entertainment, to have the educational institutions, to be able to have the sophistication that the Hellenist culture created for them. The Sadducees were wealthy, powerful Jews that openly worked with the Gentile leaders to maintain peace and to ensure that measure of political clout. And so you begin to see those natural tendencies of these two different parties. The more liberal ideas are introduced, the more conservative people have a tendency to fight that by becoming even more dramatically conservative in their eyes. And so you can see how the law becomes distorted and how the law becomes something of a tool to protect and defend a way of life. And you can see how the Sadducees began to be very protective of the taxes, of the things that were owed based off of being part of the Jewish state and Jewish nation. All right, so we're going to end this class here, and we will continue in the next class to look at this history of this remnant and of this people.